Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Level Up with Lori. This is episode 10 titled A Critical Step in Creating a Data Informed Enterprise That Organizations Overlook. Welcome to the show. And as you can see, Karen Dietz has returned for me for her
Hello.
third show with me. The reason that she's returned is that we have been since 2015 creating a framework for collaborative data informed decision making that we now call making smarter decisions with data. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me give you kind of an overview of how things are going to go, because it's going to be a little bit different than the way we've done things in the past.
Mhm.
Um, First of all, we're going to kind of give you a brief tour of how and why we came up with this framework, and then we're going to dive into the specifics of it. Now, the reason we're going to do both of those pieces is that we want to accelerate your work. We don't want you having to go through all the different steps that we've
Right.
gone through to get here, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, right.
And the other thing is that I'm actually going to be a guest on my own show, and I fought this for a while. I have to tell you, so this is kind of an awkward situation for me to be in. But I've taken the lead in developing what's called data literacy 2.0, while Karen has taken the lead in developing data storytelling 2.0. So we're going to kind of switch roles today, and she's going to be asking me some questions as well as adding to the conversation, and you can let us know how that goes. By the way, if you've just joined us, what I'd like you to do is to tell us who you are, because otherwise I don't see your names. They could say 350
Right.
people were on today's show, and I'd be like, who is that? So please tell us who you are and where you're from, and your job title would be great. That's all we need to know. And when it shows up on my screen, I will do the same thing. I'm just going to look here again on LinkedIn to see if my own show. Yep, my show has come live. So I'll take a look at us, and please introduce yourself. By the way, just because I'm working on data literacy 2.0 and Karen's working on data storytelling 2.0, especially for the framework that we'll go through today, both of those topics are intricately connected to each other. And I think that you'll be able to see that. But we have a special favor to ask of you, because we can't be in public settings with people anymore. And I've been teaching this framework since 2016. It started in Toronto. And what I did when I first started to present was we wanted feedback. So I called it crowdsourcing. I just said to the people who heard it for the first time, give us your feedback. Now, Karen and I are both intimately aware of what George Box has said. You know, George Box is a renowned statistician. He has since passed. But he said, no model is right. Some models are just more useful than others. And that's the way we would like to have your feedback, is to let us know what's useful for you and what sorts of things you would like to see added to it. Obviously, in the hour, because we're doing some of the historical perspective with you and some of our frame of reference about where we came from, we can't be all that detailed in the framework itself. But what I can tell you is, in the coming weeks with this show, I'm going to have experts on with us to talk about each of the pieces, so you will get the detail. And Karen's helping me with the overview, and she's done already one piece with me, which is the brain research that goes along with this. So how about we get started? And let me see if anybody, I don't see if anyone's joined us yet that hasn't showed up on my screen. But if you are here, please tell us who you are, your name, and where you're from, so that you can add to the conversation as well.
All right. Great. Well, let's get going.
Thanks.
So let's start first, so Lori, with you sharing with us a bit more about your background, because I don't think people understand or realize, where you've been coming from as you've been working with the data literacy angle of it and the decision making part of it. So, help us out here. Clue us into some of the things that you've been engaged with in the past that are informing our work today.
Sure. Let me just welcome a couple people. We have Dan Chernecko, who's with us from NLCQL, and Samba Ba is with us too. So thank you. And if there's more of you with us, please let us know. So for me, it goes back to an incident that happened when I was 30 years old. I was working for a consulting firm, and we were supposed to implement Dr. Deming's framework inside
Mm.
of organizations. But my company had a really unique perspective, because a lot of our clients were clients who had failed at doing this work. So
Ah.
what they did was they paired people like me who have expertise in organization development and strategy with PhD statisticians. And I just happened to be an account manager. So I got to manage the whole of us. But in October of my 30th year, I was with a new CEO, and he had just introduced himself to his leaders, and the previous team within my consulting firm had gotten let go because they were felt to be like too stodgy and too traditional in the approach, and this new CEO wanted something different. And he said to me behind closed doors, he said, "This company has been very lucky, and all of the decisions it's made to make it as successful as it is today were through dumb luck." And so, and I thought, I've never heard what CEO actually admits that to you, right?
Right, right.
Especially at my age. He was probably in his 50s. And he said, "So I know you're supposed to come in and do this Deming thing or whatever, but could you do something else for me at the same time? I mean, you can kind of like sprinkle that on top." He said, "What I really need you to do is I need you to help us understand our data and make better decisions."
Mm.
And little did I know that the things that we would do for the next 4 years would inform my practice today.
Mm.
So we actually did all the really detailed work that folks are doing today to look at the use of data, not just at the tactical level, but also at the operational level. And for me, I think something that really stands out there is that my statistician colleagues used to say to me, "Data has a voice. We need to make it talk to us." What I know today is that that's only half true.
Right.
Data can give us observations, but we as human beings have the voice.
Mhm.
And what story work has taught me in the years that I've been doing story work with you, which actually we've been working together for 17 years now on this, is that we have to give data a voice. And when we give it a voice, that's when it becomes more valuable. But the other thing that this experience taught me is that we have to switch the way people think before we can really change their behaviors.
Mhm.
And so the companies that had been unsuccessful in doing this work had done two things. They'd gone in and like taught weeks and weeks and weeks of statistical training, no different than what people are doing today with analytical training.
Exactly right.
Assuming, right?
Yep.
Assuming that if I train 1,000 individuals, that will mean my company becomes smarter with decision making. It doesn't. Just
Ah,
because, right? And you know this from your own work. Just because
right.
people know how to use data better doesn't mean that the culture that underlies it shifts. So I have this issue with what people call data democratization. I think, yes, we do want that. That's no different than
Mhm.
what we used to call open book management. But what we're missing is a phrase that Spencer Sabset gave me. And that phrase is decision democratization. How do we
Right.
give the people closest to the work the opportunity to make decisions based on the data they're looking at? It's just
Right.
not enough to give them access to the data.
Right.
They have to be able to do something with it. But the other thing that this experience gave me was we did a lot of work in strategy. And so, what I also have experience in doing is how do you take strategic decisions through a process that allows an organization to actually be more nimble?
Mhm.
Along the way and smarter. And so both of those have come together to inform me. And then, of course, our work together on the Dummies book, right?
Right.
When we
Right.
we wrote chapter 8, what do you do with data? Little did we know that we were ahead of the ball game at that
Mhm.
point.
Mhm. Right. Okay, great. So, a wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, right?
Mhm.
And I love all the things that you shared because it makes sense now as we're talking, as we're going to be talking today. It makes sense why we are talking about the topics that we are, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
why we developed this smarter model for decision making that's
Right.
based in data, data storytelling, decision sciences, all that kind of good stuff. Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, and I came to the table here because we used to curate articles on. Well, I was trying to find the best in business storytelling so that I could share that with the world, clean up all the junk and stuff that was out there, all these misconceptions
Mhm.
about what storytelling is and how to do it really well. And what I kept seeing was, oh, people talking about data storytelling. And I would look at what they were talking about and the examples they were using, and I'm kind of going, no, I don't think so. I mean, it's not a story. A lot of missing story elements, right? A lot of missing telling and influence elements, right?
Right,
And so what I saw was data displays, data visualization, but what happens after that?
right,
And so this is, why we've been talking for the last bunch of years
right.
on this. And so I think we have some unique contributions, right, to make to data literacy, data storytelling, all that good kind of stuff. And what I particularly saw, I saw several gaps, right? And I want to talk to you and have you share with us some of the gaps that you were seeing also. So some of the gaps I was seeing is that, okay, we've got data, right? But where are the insights for that data, and how do those insights actually move us to action? Because business storytelling is all about action, motivation, decision making. So if that's missing, then oh, maybe there's some upgrades that need to be made. But share with us some of your background, some of the pieces that you saw missing.
Well, I first took a look when you and I wrote this chapter on what to do with data. I took a look at what was being written in the data science and data analytics arena.
Right.
And I noticed that there was a decision model that data scientists called OCM. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the letters are OSEMN. And those letters stand for obtaining the data, scrubbing the data, exploring with the data, modeling the data, and interpreting the data. And so one of the pieces that you just spoke about was missing. Where is the action piece of that? It's kind of like the so what, like
Right.
what do we do with this? But I
Mhm.
also felt like I was Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. I guess that's the analogy that I give. And
Ah,
let me kind of talk to you about what I see in there. And by the way, Renee McGregor from South Africa has joined us. I'm so excited to
great.
hear
Yay.
Renee. And Danette McGilvray, who is my colleague as well in the data quality industry, has joined us too. But so I'm going to kind of use both of my hands to describe this. So everyone has been focused, and even back to 2015, 2016, 2017, on the data. So it's
Mhm.
it's all about the data, like OCM, and everyone's talking about, well, we need to create citizen data scientists, and I'm like, yeah, but that sounds like what we tried to do when I was in my 30s, where we trained everyone in statistics. So now people want to train folks in data science and analytics, but that doesn't change the underlying culture in an organization, nor does it change their thinking on how to
Right.
be able to use that data.
Right.
And so I said, well, how come there's not this other piece, which is what I call decisioning? And so when I work with CEOs, so for example, last November, I was working with a group of 17 CEOs for the day. And the two questions that continually stand out to me in our conversations about this, because they look at the data, but the data for them is not, it doesn't have any use. It doesn't have
Mm,
a use unless it's used in decision making. So you
mm,
can do all this monitoring and status reporting that you want, but it has to get utilized. And so what
mhm.
happens sometimes is people say, well, how come my executive isn't looking at the data that I'm putting into the recent reports? And it's because it hasn't been teed up for decision making for them,
Right.
right? It's too hard for them to find, or they don't know where to access it.
Or
But
they don't know how to make the context, link the context and the meaning of the data to their decisions that they have to make, at that particular time.
right, exactly. But there's two key decisions that I think are overriding for them, and that is outside of an innovation lab or experimentation, what's the cost of making a bad decision? And that
Yeah.
goes back to what I was told, right, by that CEO years ago. It's all dumb luck. And for and if I say that to CEOs today, they all laugh at me and they go, "Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone, because that's how a lot of our
Yeah,
decisions.
I know.
We don't understand how things work, because what they're actually getting at is that we live in an open system, and a lot of data analytics thinks about the world as being a closed system.
Right.
That there's no outside influences. But the second question is, even if we make a right decision, are we fully actioning it? Which gets back to, how do we influence people to make change happen? And then from there, I mean, the other gaps that I saw had to do with things like a real confusion between um, observations of data and what people call insights, and
Ab-
people saying that
Absolutely.
technology could give us insights.
Mm,
And I'm afraid it can't, folks. I mean, I don't care how good your AI and machine learning is. The most it can do is perhaps direct you to look at particular items. But it's and I still remember this day, Karen, when I was teaching a course on strategic thinking, and you and I were having this conversation because I think you said to me something like, "No insight, no story," right? I mean,
right.
that
Absolutely. No insight, no story.
right. And so the dilemma we have is people think you should story the data, and we're saying no, you should story the insight.
Hmm.
Because to story the data still keeps you talking about the data. And when in fact, I mean, all you have to do is look at the COVID situation with all these government officials around the world, and they
Hmm.
keep saying, "Who has the answer?" They just want someone to give them some direction. So that, but if they are forced to look at the data, it's overwhelming to them. I
Right.
mean, it doesn't even matter if the experts are at odds with each other. They can put those pieces together, but they just want someone to take that extra step. And I said to you, I said, I wonder if there's any research on what insight is. And
Hmm.
the funny thing is that I have this with me. Um, I use this book as one of my textbooks in strategic thinking, the graduate class I teach, and it's called Strategic Thinking and the New Science. And the book is from 1999. And it just so happens,
I
I
love it.
know, I
I
know,
love it. It's a classic, and we need these classics very often.
absolutely. Well, but I was, you and I were talking about it, and all of a sudden, I like had a reading in class, and on page 90 in this book, it says the word insight implies seeing into, penetrating, or understanding something. And oh, by the way, here's all the research on insight. And I went, there's research
Yeah.
on insight? There's
Yeah.
research on insight? And
Yeah.
I think that the challenge is that we see all these data visualizations, and we see a bunch of observations, and we
Yeah.
think those are the insights. But when in fact, what the research on insight says, and all of you, you've had it, I've had it,
Yep.
right? Insight comes when you separate from the data. Insight comes when you jog. Insight
Hmm.
comes when you take a shower. Insight comes when you're sleeping at night. That's why sleep is so magical. It comes when the unconscious brain can connect the dots between disparate pieces of data. And all of a sudden, you get this aha, because that's actually what
Hmm.
the academic literature calls an insight. They call it an aha.
Hmm.
And it's not intuition, by the way,
Right.
not intuition, and that's important to know. But this insight comes fully formed. It's as though I have the answer. And most times, if it comes to you, it's not evident to other people.
Mm.
And I think that that's what we've been working on, right? That's the story piece. We
Right.
believe that if you can, since it can't come easily to other people, but the data, people can see the data, then why aren't we talking about the story surrounding the insight,
Right.
right?
Yeah, do we want to talk a little bit about insights and the kinds of insights that we've come
Sure.
up with? So, as we were looking and we were both researching insights, and we were both coming up with some ideas about how to put this into a framework, a useful framework and process for people.
Right.
And so kind of came up with a little, three categories of insights that we've found could be most useful for business. And the first level of insight is one of, oh, knowledge, right? Which is, oh, I get it, right? And it's usually about a pattern that we see kind of makes sense to us of something that is happening in the world or
Right,
in
but
work.
it's new, but it's new to other people, right? It's
Right,
new, right? It's usually, I mean, the way we looked at it is that if it's a knowledge insight, it's new knowledge.
right, and it just makes sense. Okay, that makes sense to me,
Hmm.
right? I get it. But there's two other kinds of insights that go beyond this, and the next level of insight is one about understanding. Right? And this is like, oh, it's about the current day. And it's like, oh, now I see the little improvement we can make around something that we're already doing, right, to get
Right.
us to the next place. And so this is, oh, yeah, I understand now. And this is what we can do. And then the third level of insight, which is we call the future state insight, right? Because that understanding insight is about current reality. And then the next level of insight is about the future. And this is where we go, oh my gosh, right?
Yes.
Now I see a new marketplace. Now I see a disruption that can
Right.
happen. Now I see a completely, new, innovative way, right? We can move forward that brings us into the future, right? And so, what do you want to add to that? Because this is something we both talked about.
Well, I think it's and let me introduce a few people who've just joined us, and then
Yeah,
I'll come back and answer your question.
and
So
I'll have a sip of my coffee while you do that.
that's great. So, Yulia has joined us from Toronto. She's creating an analytics course. Paranaz has joined us, and thank you for your comment about this being an interesting topic. It certainly is to us as well.
Hmm.
So, the way that we came up with these insights, I mean, and I got to tell you, a lot of when you create a framework for something is happenstance because
Hmm.
things just come to you from your past experience. And what happened when Karen was starting to talk with me about, well, hey, this is what you found about insight. I'm thinking that there are different types of insights. I said, you know what that reminds me of? I said, it reminds me of a conversation I had a long time ago, 1995, with
Hmm.
Tom Murrin, who was the dean of the business school at Duquesne University. And I
Hmm.
was working on a strategic plan for his school of business. And one of the things that he really wanted to get across was the data wisdom continuum. And I had never
Oh,
heard
right.
right, right,
Absolutely.
right. And I had never heard about it before. And it's a framework that was really made popular by Russell Acuff in the strategy arena. Now,
Hmm.
it's interesting because a lot of folks in the analytics field have chosen this as their decision making framework, and we did too early on.
Early on.
Except what we have done is we've realized that decision making around data is not an analytics process. It is a process that's composed of both strategic thinking and analytical thinking. But for
Right.
those of you who are not familiar with the framework, because this is where we started
Hmm.
back in like 2016, is it's data, information, understanding, or knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And so,
Right.
knowledge, understanding, and wisdom were our three types of insights. And the data for us was how do you collect data? And then the information piece was a piece that, and Danette McGilvray is with us, and she really honed this home for me several years ago
Yeah.
when we worked
Hmm.
together. And that is, can we trust the data? Do we have
Right.
confidence in the data itself? And so there's a lot around data quality. Now, what we know to be true today, and we can speak about, I'll just mention it now, it might come up later too, is that trust is also around the person who's
Oh,
data,
yes,
right? Because,
absolutely.
and I learned that from a senior VP in the Ukraine of sales. He and I were having a conversation one day as I was teaching our decision framework to his organization, and he said to me, he said my sales folks love to call me up and say, "Hey, we would like to do X, Y, Z," and I say to them, "Oh, is that what the data is saying?" And they say, "Yes, that's what the data is saying." He said, and they sound so absolutist in their comment. He said, but what I know, because I've been in the field of sales for a long time, is that all data has risk associated with it. There's a level of
Hmm.
uncertainty.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it might be that, on the average, 80% of the time, maybe this is true, but 20% of the time, it's not. And
Right.
they never talk to me about that uncertainty with
Mm.
the data. And then they wonder, they say to me, why do you ignore the data? And he goes, I'm not ignoring the data, I'm ignoring you.
Oh, that's so funny. Right.
It has to do with whether or not I trust you. Do I trust that you're telling me, the whole story, so to
Right.
speak? But I'm using story in a different sense here. So,
Oh, but no, not really, because it's story is all about influence,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
And so trust, you have to start really looking hard at trust, right?
Yes,
Because without trust, you don't have influence.
yes.
And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and so the challenge though that we had with this framework that started to come up when we started to teach it to people, and even actually before we taught it to people, we recognized, you and I did, that there was a piece missing from it. And this is a piece that some people might want to debate a little bit, and that is that it was missing a business value, what we call a business value question.
Absolutely. I was just going to ask about that because that was a significant part of our thinking around developing these models and these processes. Right.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
talk some more about this.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples that I've seen recently on LinkedIn. And let me see if there's anyone new who's joined us, we can't see you unless you introduce yourself. So please do so. Otherwise, you're just in the background. You're kind of
Right.
hidden from me. And there's a reason I'll want to know who you are a little bit later on. But if you could just say, hi, I'm here, hey, that would be great. Um, so about a week ago, Amazon put up a huge data lake with COVID-19 data in it.
Mm.
And it was a physician who announced it in a post. I decided, I said to him, I said, what decisions informed the data that you put into this data lake?
Mm.
I didn't hear anything. And about a day later, I got a comment back and it said, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
thought, wow, what he wants us to do is just browse the data. Now,
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying that browsing isn't appropriate with data, but
Right.
the problem is this. If you know the brain research, which you and I have been studying, everyone comes with a frame,
Hmm.
and that frame informs how they look at the data. If
Right.
you do not help to structure that frame with what you want people in general to kind of look at, then you're going to have an issue because they won't know where to browse.
Right.
But there's another piece too. So there was another post that went up about COVID. And this particular gentleman, I'll just kind of read you what he put down. He actually had questions, which is why
Oh,
I got really
yeah.
intrigued by it. And so he said, there's a lot of reports, dashboards, and data on the coronavirus. And he said, I wanted to know which countries were doing well. And since we postponed the Olympics, maybe we could give the country who's doing the best a coronavirus medal.
Ah,
Okay,
love it.
this was kind of ingenious. But the questions he asked himself are, which are the top 35 countries that have registered coronavirus cases? Because he wanted a good sample size. Which countries have a high recovery rate? Which ones have a low death rate? And then who's the winner in terms of both high recovery rate and low death rate? And he said the winner, based on today's Wikipedia data, which would have been the end of March, is Thailand, followed by Canada. And my first reaction, and I'm sorry for this reaction, I kind of went like, so what? Who cares? I
Ah,
went,
well,
oh, well, and the reason I went, so what? Who cares? Is I said to myself, how does that inform the decision making process? All that
right.
does is get us what you talked about, gets us knowledge. But
Right.
and it's new knowledge. It's new knowledge, right? Because did you know that Thailand on March 31st was the top country and Canada was
Right.
second?
And
Right.
it might bring us up into understanding.
It
Maybe
might.
there might be something, but that's
No. So I wrote him back. I wrote him back and I said, this is, and this was at the time. So people can play with this question if you want. But one of my big bugaboos is when you ask questions, and I don't care if we're entering this process through an ad hoc query or we're entering this process because we have a dashboard that's going to be put together and people want to know what data to put on the dashboard. The question I wanted to know the answer to was, what are the top 3 actions that countries which are more quickly mitigating the effects of COVID-19 are taking to protect all of their citizens in their jurisdiction? And the reason I wrote it as an action question. What are the
Mhm.
top 3 actions? I didn't say um I'd like to know something, but I want to know what to do differently. And
It's
what I've come to learn in my workshops, because I've changed this over the years, because it's been a learning, I think, for you and me from the feedback we've gotten from folks, is that if you do not structure the questions as an action oriented question, you will
Mhm.
stop at knowledge.
Right. You will. You will. Another way to think about this is when I was working a few years ago with a very large medical group, we were putting together a dashboard.
Hmm.
And I kept asking them, okay, you're going to collect data. So to inform the dashboard, ultimately, what do you want physicians to do?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because if you don't know what you want physicians to do with the data you're sharing with them, then why are you even bothering? And so we had to approach the whole dashboard from what actions do you want people to take with the data?
Yes.
And that informed then how we put the dashboard, together, and the ways we made the data easily to take action on.
Correct. Correct. So if I had my wish today based on our decision model, that's the first thing I think, or one of the first things I would change in organizations, because when you change an artifact like that and you
Hmm.
change the thinking, right? It's switching from
Right,
data.
right.
What data should we put on the dashboard to what decisions do we want to make? Once I understand the decisions we want to make, then I can say what data goes onto the dashboard.
Right,
Right?
and
It's a
which is
shift.
exactly, which is why in our model that we put together, we start with what are the business value questions,
Right. Right.
and then what kinds of questions do you need to ask to tease out that business value, and then we actually put together questions, for moving through the whole, rest of the model all the way up to those future state insights. And but if we don't start with the business value question, then it becomes a crapshoot.
Well, it becomes a crapshoot because you're allowing the individual who's looking at the data and browsing it to make their own assumptions, which
That's
means
right.
that is when bias, and people keep saying, take bias out of this. Well, but that's the first place it could potentially enter, is when you don't give them enough direction to know where to look, because all they have is their own experience. And that could be limited for a lot of people. They wouldn't know how to look at that.
Well, and what I like is that it really is a relationship that goes on between the person requesting the data and the people providing the data, so that they come to the best solutions possible for the data that is desired. And so it's
Well, can I take that a step further? Is
yeah,
that okay?
yeah.
So, here's one of my examples about how not to do it, though, because there is a
Okay,
way to have a conversation and a way not to have a conversation. And
right.
if people have been with me in training, they've heard this before. But when I first moved to Las Vegas, so I live. For those of you who don't know me, I live a block off of the Las Vegas Strip, which is right now it is a ghost town.
Mm,
There is no
right.
reason to be here. We have the highest unemployment rate in the U.S. at the moment. Um, but this woman who I met with was worked with data, and I said to her something like, "How's your day going so far?" We met around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and she said, "Oh, you don't want to know." I said, "Yeah, I kind of do. I kind of do." And she said, "Well, I had this executive come to me and ask for data on the cabanas around the pools." Now, the cabanas are these tent-like structures that
Hmm.
people rent
Hmm.
when they want to stay at a pool all day long. And that some of these cabanas are large enough to have parties in them and table service and
Hmm.
lots of booze and
Hmm.
other sorts of things. And I said, "Well, what did you say to this executive when she asked you that question?" And she said, I said to her, "We have a lot of properties and we have a lot of pools. So, do you want the data by property? Or do you want the data by pool by property? Or do you want the data by Monday through Friday versus Saturday and Sunday? Or do you want the data by time of day? Or do you
Right.
want the data if there is a DJ or a band at the pool? Or do you want the data on the food? Or maybe you want the food and the beverage split out? And do you want it then maybe split out if it's a weekend versus a holiday?" And I thought to myself, this is an analytical. She had an analytical
Yes.
conversation. And
Yes.
when I would say, no, 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 the conversation that's a convergent conversation. You need to have a divergent conversation.
Hmm.
When you start saying to people, "What are you going to do?" Like you did. What are you going to do with the data?
Right.
What decision-
What that you're trying to solve, right, or get the answer to by requesting this data. That will tell you a lot more than the analytical discussion that she had with them.
Well, right, and it's strategic thinking at
Yes.
the front end. So we've got to start. This is not critical thinking. This is strategic thinking. So the challenge, I think, sometimes is people come as messengers for others. Like this woman who approached her might not have even been able to answer that question because it might have been another person who sent her to say, hey,
Right.
go ask
Right.
someone, right? So they might not know. But a lot of leaders may step back and say, I haven't thought about that.
Hmm.
Or they might say, we don't have time for that, right?
Mm,
Especially today. But we do have to make time for it because we need to understand their mental model.
hmm.
And again, their frame of reference. I'm not trying to stop you from browsing other data because if
Right.
you have the question, the data they ask for might be incorrect based on the question they want to have answered. They need to trust that if you have the right questions and the right problems and the right issues they want solved or action taken on, that you will be able to figure out what data might be useful. And if you can't figure it out, you would talk to other people who can. So
Right.
now we've started this collaboration process.
Which builds trust, by the way.
Yes, yes, it does build trust, right? But it also builds, it helps to what I call manage up, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
we sometimes have to teach leaders how to do this because they've not been become skilled in knowing how to do it on their own. I just wanted to say there's a couple of comments here. Vince, my friend Vince Mirabelli from Canada has joined us. He said he loved this story. And then James Bryant says, why are you collecting and producing data if you don't know what people want it for? This
That's right.
happens all the time, James. We're asking ourselves the same question, and Matthew Small says that he agrees with us. So we found that to be a limitation when we did the data wisdom continuum. We had to add a front end to it. Now, what we did have in that framework, and then if you're okay, I kind of want to talk to you about
Yeah.
like what the next step was.
Yes.
What we
Yes.
did
Yes.
have in that framework that others didn't have, because there are several people who had a data wisdom continuum framework. I've
Right.
seen them as recently as a conference I was at last
Hmm.
November in London.
Hmm.
Is we built in intuition
Yeah.
into all of the steps because, and here's why. I had a conversation one evening in New York with a colleague of mine, and he works for Gartner as an executive, and I said, David, I don't understand. There's data and there's intuition, and I
Mm.
said, I, I they're both true. People keep trying to take out intuition, but the research shows that intuition is a form of data. And by
Yes.
the way, folks, there's a ton of research on
Yes.
this in the
Yes.
academic literature. It's a form of data. And
Hmm.
so we have to somehow go like this. We need to blend them together. What is that blending? What's that blending? And he said, it's right in front of you. And I said, no, there's an Argentinian steak right in front of me. I don't think that's the answer. He said to me, I had one of my moments, and he pointed right at my forehead. He said, no, silly, it's right here in front of your
Right.
eyes. And I went, oh, it's human reasoning.
Yes.
That's really it. And by the way, as soon as I had that realization and I went and hunt to kind of say, has anyone talked about it? I immediately found an article by Paul Schumacher at MIT who has said that we have got to the number one issue in the data analytics area for him is this blending together into human reasoning and honoring that intuition exists. Now,
Hmm.
for the most part, intuition is not correct, but we can't negate it. So that means in the questioning process, when I'm saying, what's the problem you're trying to solve and all of that, what I'm also saying to the person is, have you already made up your mind?
Right. Absolutely.
Right? Because if you've made up your mind
Hmm.
and you're 1,000% certain that your way is the right way and you're just having me do this to waste my time, don't waste your time. Now, if you're receptive to what the data is going to tell you, I might take you a step further and say, hypothesize for me. What do you think the two or three or four things might be that the data tells us? So
Mm.
I again know their frame of reference, and then I might
Hmm.
even play through with them. Hey, if it was A and this was the action, would you take it? If it were B and this was the action, would you take it? Because what I'm really trying to do up front is tee them up to see the results.
Well, yeah, and what you're talking about is collaboration.
Yes.
Also, it's a
Yeah.
collaborative discussion, a collaborative experience that is necessary, right, in order to move, I think, all of our thinking and activity around data forward.
Mhm. Mhm. And I just want to make a comment on something. And Donald, thank you so much. Donald Farmer just commented. He said, I love the distinction between divergent and convergent questions. That gets me thinking. Um, and Donald, it did for me too, but the divergent comes out of strategic thinking. So the way that I look at the decision making process now, which and we'll get to it, we'll kind of outline it for you in a few minutes, is it starts divergent, and then it gets convergent as you collect the data and you start to see if the data is clean. But when you start to get to insights, it once again becomes divergent, because insight
Right.
is a divergent activity, it's not a convergent activity. And that's what
Absolutely.
people don't know. So I used to say it was an hourglass, but it's not an hourglass, it's an hourglass with a bulge in the middle. And this
Reminds me of a martini glass when they've
there you
got
go.
that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But it has this bulge in the middle, and that's where divergent happens. And then at the end, when we're taking action, after we've made a decision
Mhm.
and we say we're going to take action, what is it that we're going to do to fully implement it is also a divergent. Because then we
Absolutely.
have to create the project plans, if required, if it's
Mhm.
active in action, to put
Mhm.
that into place. So it starts wide, it gets narrow, insights makes it bigger again, it goes through the process of decisioning and then gets wider.
Yeah.
What happened to us, and I think you are always the recipient of my phone calls and my emails, aren't you? I remember the day. This was like, oh my gosh, 15 months ago now, because it was like January, February of last year.
Mm.
I started emailing you and I went, something's up, something's up, something's up. And I noticed several things starting to happen that caused us, right, to make a shift in our framework.
Mhm.
I noticed, first of all, that Cassie Coscroft from Google had changed her job title. She had changed it from chief decision scientist, no, chief data scientist to
Scientists.
chief decision scientist. Thank you.
Right.
And then I went and I read her article about it in Medium as soon as I saw her job title change, because I thought she's got to have written about this. And she writes
Mhm.
all the time.
Mhm.
And she started to talk about something called decision intelligence. And I'm like, what's decision intelligence? And then I realized that Lorian Pratt was behind that. And decision intelligence, I love. Lorian's been working on this for 10 years. And I haven't yet contacted her about being a guest, but I promise I'm going to do
Yeah,
so in the
absolutely.
future. Is the combination of data science, management science, and social sciences. And Lorian said in our show on the brain research, and I would think I would say to her, and the psychological sciences,
Yes.
because the brain research today is just so prolific. And by the way, folks, Karen and I did an entire hour on this a couple weeks ago, which is up
Right.
on YouTube, on all the brain research that is behind everything to do with data and decision
Story.
story. Right. So that, and then at about the same time, I was doing a workshop and I got a question, which this is the one that you you got from me. And I said, a student asked me in class, I'm still crowdsourcing, even last year and today, where is the decision made in your framework? Is it made at the business value question, the data, the information,
Mhm.
the trusting piece, the
Mhm.
knowledge insight, the understanding, or the wisdom insight? And you said to me, I mean, you laughed at me.
It's everywhere.
Yeah,
It's along the whole place, the whole process.
right. And I said, no, I don't think that's what this person meant. I said, I think they were very literal. And I
Mhm.
sat back and I looked at our framework and I said, I think that we assumed some steps. We assumed some steps. So, um, the comedy is, for those of you who are listening in, and I was going to see here, James Bryant says, Laura, I have to dip back, but I am sure you would agree that data is pointless unless it creates an understanding that leads to a decision that ends in an action. Anything else is wallpaper. And I'm like,
Yes.
Yahoo! Let's put that on.
Absolutely. There
James,
we go.
we need to put that up on a LinkedIn post today, because that's exactly what we're talking about. But it's that back end piece about the actioning that we had just assumed that people knew what to do with. So
Right. Yeah.
I said to you, I said, I'm going to find an acronym. I remember you
That's right.
saying this, right? And I put on I said it has something to do with smarter, faster. And you said to me, we can't guarantee that if people take all these steps, it'll be faster.
Faster. Right.
I said, yeah, but people want to be more nimble. And you said, yeah, but we still can't guarantee that. I mean, it was perfect, right?
Mhm.
And so I went to bed that night and I woke up the next morning, and this is how my brain works. And I called you up and I said, it's the acronym SMARTER. And you said to me, "How do you know?" And I said, "I don't."
It's that intuition, right? It's that insight that you just had. You're
It's
just
insight.
modeling, right, what we've
Yeah.
been talking about.
Yeah, so I want to outline for you. And by the way, folks, I tried to put up a 4-page handout onto LinkedIn, a PDF that you could download with this information. And LinkedIn is not being kind to me today. So
Oh, I know.
if you email me on LinkedIn, I will promise to send you the diagram we put together in a chart that starts to outline this for you. Um, but as I said, future shows will dive into each piece. So what we now call the SMARTER model, and SMARTER is the acronym. So S stands for setting the context, which is what we've been talking about, like the questioning process and the
Right.
collaboration and talking and making
Mhm.
certain that we've even gotten something legitimate. But as we talked about, you can enter it two ways. You can enter it through a query. You could enter it through someone starting up a dashboard. And for those of you who want to do browsing, you could enter that way too. I'm not going to
Yeah,
narrate
yeah.
what happened, but just know that your what your frame of reference is. And for us, I think the best um, the best people to facilitate this whole process, because we haven't talked about that, but the best people to facilitate this whole process for others are those who have knowledge of the business and knowledge of the data. Now, you don't
Right.
have to be steeped well in both. You just have to kind of know both to facilitate it, right?
Right. Right.
What's the business value? It stands for the seek context. The M is manage the data, which many of you who are listening to us are in
Mhm.
that particular bailiwick. By the way, next week I'm going to have Robert Vane on, and one of the topics we're going to talk about is something he's been. I saw a post from him on, but a lot of other things, which has to do with the algorithms manipulating your data in such a way that you could put in accurate, truthful data and still get out garbage. And I've got a lot of examples of those in my own work
Yep.
with people where
Yep.
that happens because of the technology itself. The A stands for assure confidence. And that's what we've been talking about, right? The trust. Well,
Mhm.
to me, it's about risk. How much risk are you willing to take? Because you will never, ever have 100% of the data you need. You will never
Right.
have it, and it will never, ever be 100% clean. You'll never have a single source of truth. And people say, well, don't you have to wait, Lori? Don't you have to wait until the data's cleansed and everything else to make the decision? And I'm like, only if the person who's making the decision can wait.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, wouldn't you say with COVID data right now? I mean, we can't wait. We're just putting together, right? We don't know
Right.
if the data is right, but what we're doing, what really good leaders around the world are doing that I absolutely adore, and the leadership research supports this, is they're making a decision based upon what they know today. And if
Right.
the decision is wrong tomorrow because of new data, they're changing their
That's
answer.
exactly right.
And
That's
people
exactly right.
look for leaders like that.
Right.
Not that they're willy-nilly, well, we got some,
No.
not that they're
No.
willy-nilly, but that really seriously say, "I'm looking at what the experts say, and I'm
Yeah.
basing it as much as I can, and there's a risk. I know there's a risk. We don't know everything." But you know what? We've never known
Mhm.
everything. We've never, and we never will. If
Right.
anything, COVID has told us that we live in a VUCA environment, right?
Right.
Volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous, and it's always gonna stay that way. It's not
Right.
gonna change, and it hasn't been different. We just haven't wanted to acknowledge it.
So
Then
the
the
assurance, though, is about taking all of that and still building trust, right?
Correct. Well, and trust
So,
in the person who's giving it to you. So you've got to think about it. Like if I'm a
yeah,
person, let's say I was inside an organization and I'm facilitating this process and I'm thinking about the people who have to be involved at each step along the way. And for those of you who are saying, well, who's going to facilitate this? Therein lies the $64,000 question,
right,
right?
right, because you do need someone to facilitate it.
Right, because right now, if you look at the roles of chief data officers and their departments, the roles of chief analytics officers and their departments, this piece of facilitating decision making is not in there. It's
Right.
not there. So I've said that one of the groups of folks in an organization who can help to facilitate are business analysts. Some people
Mhm.
think that
Right.
data
Right.
scientists can. A data scientist could if they understood the totality of the business.
Mhm.
But there people in finance could do it.
Right.
Anyone who's got a broad view of doing it. So let me come back again. So S is
Yes.
context, M is manage the data, A is assure
Assurance.
confidence. The R stands for the three types of insights we talked about, revealing insights.
Yes.
And we believe, we do, you and I do, that if you look at any data set, you can probably find all three types of insights: new
Yes.
knowledge, something you should do right now, and something long term. The challenge is that we sometimes don't look for all three, and you don't want to stop at knowledge. And we'll come.
Yeah, and what I've experienced is that we have an awful lot of knowledge, right, that is in the data. That's easy to identify. Then next we have all of those understanding our current state,
Right.
and it is harder to tease out the future state, but they are there if you're looking for them.
Well, but for someone like me, so for me, it's like second nature because I work as a strategist and a
Mhm.
futurist. So I
Mhm.
see them because of my insight. My
Mhm.
brain just works in different ways. So sometimes I
Mhm.
can look at a data set and people will go, "How did you have that insight about the
Right.
future?" I quite don't know. I quite don't know. I still remember telling a pipeline company in like 1992 or 93. I looked at like 500 pages of data, and I said to them, I think this was the wrong way to do, but I said, I think to them, I said, instead of moving oil and gas through your pipelines, I think you should move water.
Mm.
And a lot of their pipelines are in states that are in drought situations in the US today.
Oh,
I'm
there you
thinking
go.
about that, right? They
Right.
didn't do that. They looked at me like you're a crazy woman.
Right.
But anyways, that's one of
But
those
I do want to reiterate, though, even in the example that you just shared, right? It is informed decision making, right? It's not out of the
yes.
blue, kind
Yeah.
of willy nilly, high woo, response. It is informed by data and experience and a whole lot of other things that that's important to acknowledge. So I just want to say that, remind people again.
Right. Thank you. And then the pieces that we've added to the back end, if you go through the word smarter, the T stands for take a stand, which is
Yes,
now where we're putting the actual decision process itself.
right.
The E for executing the decision, and the R for relaying results.
Yes.
And are we finished? So now we have the entire decision framework. Uh,
Yeah, and it's actually a loop because
yes.
the decision and the results reinform the data,
Yeah.
and can move into the future.
Right. But here's something we do have to watch for. And I had this happen on a phone call recently. I still maybe have like one or two keynotes for the fall. I mean, I think people were praying, wishful thinking that we'll be able to get together in certain cities around the
Mm.
world. But
Mhm.
I was talking to a woman, and she manages a group of people, and about 90% of the people in her group are involved in cleansing data.
Mm.
But she herself and another person are involved in helping her leader, who's a very savvy, very smart woman and moves very fast, to make these long-term strategic decisions. And the reason I'm mentioning this is for a couple of things. One is the smarter framework is robust. It can work for strategic decisions, even when the data is what we call foresight data. It's qualitative data, maybe
Mhm.
about the year 2040, and you look
Mhm.
back toward today. You can
Mhm.
still use the framework, as well as using it, as I said, for those operational and technical decisions. So they
Right.
had a longer term strategic decision that they had to make, and they had some forecasted data and some foresight data that they were trying to put together for this leader. And I said to her, all I did was I explained the smarter framework. I said, would this be
Mm.
useful if I talk about this in my keynote in the workshop that I'm doing? And I said, why don't we go through an example? And one of the things that she realized, I said, when I talk through each piece, you tell me about the decision, and let's note how much time has been spent to date on each of these letters, like how much time was spent on seeking context. She said, we actually did do that. We
Cool.
actually did it. She said, but I'll tell you in a minute about how that became a problem. She goes, we went and we got the data, we managed the data, we got her confidence in the data. We told her what the insights were in a one-on-one meeting, and she said to us, "Oh, I forgot to tell you about the three conversations I've had over the last
Oh.
5 days." So here
Mhm.
she is still collecting more information about the context. She's still up on the S. And the woman's like, I had to go back to the start again and start this process all over
Mm.
again.
Mhm.
I said, how many times did you cycle through that first piece? She said, well, I'll tell you that we aren't even to executing on the decision yet. We've just made the decision and we're at 9 months.
Yeah. Oh, 9 months. Yes.
And I'm like, we have got to, that's when I say we've got to figure out how to change this. And I said to her, if you were to sit down with your leader without talking about,
Mm.
and like you didn't have an agenda, but just said, I'd like to reflect on a past decision with you, and you were to show her this looping and how much time this looping has taken, she said, I can guarantee for you right now, it would completely change her behavior.
And in what way?
She said, because that leader doesn't like to waste time.
Mhm.
But she said she also likes to talk to people. And I said, so do you have some ideas for her about what she could do? She said, yeah, maybe she just tells us like what she's thinking about, but we don't actually start the research. And we say to her, who else do you want to talk to? Because that's never been a part of the conversation.
Yeah,
um,
because what's happening is the leader was learning more about the issue as
Correct.
she was talking to people, which was changing the data that needed to be brought forth,
Frame.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, the frame, but there was no conversation between the data folks and the leader about this level setting that was happening, and it
Yep.
wasn't happening on an ongoing basis either.
Right.
And so that's why 9 months later, right, they're still, right, looking to execute.
Well, and what I said to this woman, who I was having the conversation with, I said, could you see yourself taking on the facilitation of the decision process
Brilliant.
for
Yeah.
this leader? And she said, yes, I could.
Yeah.
Because if we spelled out these steps to her and we said, here's where we are right now in the steps, and here's what your additional information is going to do. Do you want us to loop back or do you want us to go forward? Then she could make the decision. Right now, we haven't been thinking about the decision process. We're so focused just on the data.
Right.
And I think that's where the two come together. I want to pick up a comment here about from Matthew Small. He said, I've always held single source of truth as the place to go when you can trust the data and metrics creative. Never thought that it meant a place where all the data sits. I guess I need to make it clear. And the answer is yeah, that would be helpful. I
Hmm.
think we all have to. Our languaging, our semantics,
Right.
is so critical. But I'm sorry, I interrupted. You had a comment or a question about the leader or the Houston
No,
example.
no. I was just saying that, being able to use the model would be so fabulous in terms of bringing, the everybody together and moving forward, right, in a focused way, right? And the facilitator, right, knowing that there's somebody who's facilitating the process gives greater trust and assurance also around the entire process.
Right. So for me, so I have a dream, and my dream is that every person know the process. Um, and I don't mean that they have to go to a 3-day training course, but that they somehow become familiar with the steps, and that the people who are facilitating know more, but that everybody has a common language to speak around decisioning. We keep talking about this common language of semantics around the data, and we spend gobs and gobs of time on
So true.
defining terms and metadata and business
Hmm.
rules and business modeling and all these things, but we spend zero time on the decisioning. And yet we all complain about the decision process, about our leaders. And so I would like to make that, my dream is to make it as equally important and to bring that in. And because of my prior experiences that I talked about at the beginning of this show today, what I know is that when you do this, the culture begins to shift, because what people say is, well, it becomes a pull for data, not a push of the data. People start asking for it. They start saying, these things are standing in the way. I need these issues
Hmm.
solved. I need
Hmm.
this. Are you sure I have the right level of accountability and things to be able to make these decisions? And that starts to shape the cultural pieces. It
Hmm.
gets the ball rolling, the momentum rolling, so that you can do more cultural underpinning work. Because that's really where a lot of my expertise is
Hmm.
how do
Right.
you transform the culture? But I've had the opportunity to work at this decision level
Hmm.
with lots of teams and lots of individuals over a lot of years. And I
Right.
think, right, but the gift that story brought, that you and I brought to it, I think, just in kind of closing out that one piece, is that we don't story the data, we story the insights.
Yes, we story the
And
insights and we story the process about how we
right,
got to the insights. We story the possibility, the opportunity. And as I said, storytelling is all about influence.
right.
And, so what are those influence skills that we need? Like, I also think of this facilitator as a significant part of persuasion, right?
Yes,
And stuff that goes on before you ever get to the presentation. And so there's a lot more involved here, a lot more around storytelling that isn't being addressed yet.
right.
It's starting to emerge a bit. So, yeah, I think we're both hopeful for the future that, all of us can continue to upgrade the entire process, right? So,
Absolutely. So, for those of you who've been with us, or maybe you've joined us a little bit later, because I know some folks have, as I said, I have a handout for you that gives you kind of an overview of what the framework is that we've
mhm.
talked about. I'm hoping I can figure out how to get it onto LinkedIn. They're saying my
I'll
PDF
try
won't
it too.
down.
Yeah, you send it to me.
Yeah.
I'll try it too.
And I will, I'm happy to send it to you through LinkedIn. Just let me know, if you want me to send it to you through an email address, let me know as well. And let me know what questions you have about the
Mhm.
process itself, and what, as I said earlier today, this is about crowdsourcing. What are your ideas on the ways that we can improve it? We have a tremendous amount of detail around it that obviously is not in this particular show, that will be coming out over the next couple of weeks through other folks who will be joining me and talking about the specifics. So I'm really happy that those people are going to be assisting us as well, because to me, this is all about a way to learn.
Right.
And I think I've been thinking a lot about this, because I don't know if you asked me at the beginning what people don't know about me, but I think there's another thing they might not know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I really see this decision process as what I say is a part of data literacy 2.0, as the legacy I'm meant to leave. So
Mhm.
this is not, it's the work that I do, but my passion for it goes far beyond it. I mean, you know this from me. I
Mhm.
said this to
Mhm.
you like 2 years ago. I said I think it found me. I think
Mhm.
my legacy found me, and I sometimes get a bit saddened when people tell me that I have it all wrong. And I
Well,
know there are folks out
welcome to the
there,
world. Yeah, welcome to the world of new thinking,
right?
right?
Well, I've been there. When you're a strategist, you get that, right? But I think that what we've put together, and I'm very blessed, Karen, for all of your help and work on this over the past 5, 6, 7 years. It's been amazing to help me really flesh out like
Mhm.
that. The decisioning piece along here
Mhm.
is that I know this works. I know it does. I've seen it work. I just Years ago we had different decision frameworks to use than we do now,
Mhm.
but I can see this model being so robust that it can help teams and individuals of all kinds. And so I'm hoping that others see that as well. I don't know, because I'm not going to get any feedback.
Well, to be determined, right?
That's
So
right. That's
we
right.
hope
That's
people
right.
give us
But
feedback or comment on LinkedIn, with you, send you messages and what have you. So,
Right, and so this show will be where all my other shows are, because we are at a good hour of
yes,
conversation.
yes, we need to.
It's well, actually simul streamed to YouTube. So as soon as we sign off in another 60 seconds or so, it will go live in about 10 minutes there,
Right,
and then I'll add some content to the page. There as well, for people who might want to either watch it or share it with other people, as well as it's with all of my other Level Up with Lori
right.
shows. So, Karen, thank you for kind of doing a role reversal today
Hey, it was
with me.
fun.
Yeah,
Thank
it was.
you.
It was great fun, and for taking on this role. And to all of you, please stay safe, and we'll
Mhm.
see you again soon.
Yep. Bye. See you soon. Bye bye.